I did want to start with Vladimir Putin, Michael.
Mm.
We try to generally do the more serious news at the top of the show. And in this case, I do want to go ahead and put up on the screen here a report from Axios that shows, for example, I'll put it up. Putin proposed summit with Trump at the White House. So news broke today that Donald Trump is going to meet with Vladimir Putin. Putin actually proposed it, according to this Axios report, to Steve Witkoff, and it looks like we're expecting this in the coming days. This is a story that was given to Axios. It says that Caroline Levitt said that Trump was, quote, open to meeting with both President Putin and President Zelensky and wants this brutal war to end. And this is part of another, I guess, chapter in Donald Trump's roller coaster relationship with Vladimir Putin. But Michael, you're one of the most interesting voices on this. So what do you make of Donald Trump now talking about actually sitting across the table from Vladimir Putin?
Well, I have some inside information on this. A few weeks ago at my house, I hosted the QAnon shaman. He stayed in my guest bedroom. I thought I owed him one because if it wasn't for him, somebody else would have been in jail. And we were having lunch at an organic restaurant because he eats organic. And he points to the TV where Putin and Trump were talking about their negotiating a ceasefire. I'm sure people remember when this happened a couple of weeks ago. And he turns to me and he says, I did that. So we could thank him for using his ley lines talents to ensure that this war is being brought to a swift, not as swift as either of us, I think, would like, Emily, resolution. I think, as you and I discussed, I think previously, Trump made a blunder. Because if there's one thing Russians know from years of Soviet oppression, and I speak from, being born there, it's to exploit people's weaknesses, right? So if Trump is on the campaign trail and in the White House bragging, I'm going to bring peace, well, Putin knows, okay, this guy's put his reputation on the line. I can extract a lot of concessions from him because otherwise I'm going to play him for a fool, even if I just run the clock out for 4 years. So he's obviously a very conniving, intelligent figure. I think Americans have grown to understand that this guy is no dummy. And I'm very hopeful, but I don't know what that deal is going to look like. I mean, it's probably going to look like Zelensky having to hand over, a couple of those provinces in the east. But if Putin knows that that's kind of the starting point, why wouldn't he ask for more?
Yeah. Well, this was such a signature campaign promise for
Right.
Trump. I mean, he talked all the time about being able to end the war in 24 hours. And I think people in the Beltway sort of underestimate how resonant just his calls to end war in general. I mean, people can call it naive, but his calls for peace, that is really resonant with the American people who were just completely exhausted by the Biden administration, both in the Middle East and in Russia, what they saw, I think rightfully, as bungling of both of those conflicts. So what could, I mean, your point about what this deal would look like, I agree. I think that sounds likely, but it also seems like that's something that could have already happened in the last 6 months. So am I wrong on that? Like what could happen now that hasn't already happened if they're face to face?
And the other thing is, if Trump and Putin get their handshake deal, he still has to sell it to Ukraine and he has to sell it to NATO. And I don't know that that's a given at all. I think NATO, very much has like basically a gun to the back of Zelensky's head telling him don't take a deal. A lot of people are making a lot of money from this war and also giving kind of a sense of gravitas in Europe that I'm kind of strong, confident leader. I'm standing behind the Ukrainian people, even though they're getting butchered. So there's four parties involved here. And five, I guess, if you count the UK separate from NATO in a sense.
Well, six if you count
EU.
the Q shaman.
Yeah, that's right. The biggest, most important figure who Shaw is sitting down with. So I'm very sad. It's just, I was born there. I was trying to go back, and then COVID hit, and then the war. So I never visited since I left when I was 2 years old. And your heart breaks also for the Russian people. This isn't fun for anybody, and for what? So I don't know how he's going to sell this deal. Except at a certain point, everyone's just going to have to be exhausted. And I don't think the Europeans are. I think they're itching for a fight.
Well, okay, so talk to me more about Putin in that respect, because I think that's part of what Trump may have underestimated, or Steve Witkoff may have underestimated, or actually maybe the broader sort of anti-war movement in the United States may have underestimated, is that Putin keeps throwing more and more people into a meat grinder. It's like an incredible level of death and destruction that has been happening for years now, and feels like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And it doesn't seem like he feels as though he's being squeezed at this point. I mean, we hear a lot of bluster from more neoconservative figures in the American right, or the American, I guess, center left too at this point. And some of it's true. I mean, it is true that things aren't amazing in Russia right now, but whether or not that means people want the war to end, and whether or not that means Putin thinks he has some type of political pressure to end the war, is a completely different question, isn't it, Michael?
Yeah, and also this is how they won World War II. So we don't get to tell this story in American schools, but I would encourage everyone here to just go to Wikipedia and look at Russian losses during World War II versus American losses. Many of them were preventable because Stalin never thought his good buddy Hitler was going to turn on him like he did. But the losses they suffered in Leningrad, the siege of Leningrad, which is civilians largely, and also militarily, it was just astronomical orders of magnitude more than we did. So this is part of the Russian kind of narrative and ethos. So for them, it's kind of like this call to arms, like, we're regaining what we've lost. We can't give up now. And, for a long time, it was two polar world, the Soviet Union, the US. That fell away, obviously, in the end of the late 80s, early 90s. And Putin's now put Russia as like a sense of importance. And, the American president is kind of, trying to cut a deal with him and treating him with respect. So I think there's a lot of pride for the Russian people as a result of this. And that's a very dangerous thing in this context, because I think we could all do with a little less pride, a little bit more peace.
Well, and some of those voices who have been saying, the Russian economy is in shambles and Putin is under pressure will also, I think we can predict, Michael, freak out if Donald Trump reaches some sort of deal with Putin next week. And maybe even if he gets support, or an inkling of support from the Ukrainian camp for something that looks like actually ceding territory in the Donbass. We can predict that there will be hysteria, there will be a freak out, some of which will come from people who are making money off the conflict or are benefiting in different ways from the conflict. But that's going to be, he's going to have to sell that deal to the public. And that's, can you just tell me what you think happens if we're sitting here a week from now and they have some type of deal that involves ceding territory in the Donbass? What does that pressure look like on Trump, actually? To maybe scuttle a deal that people don't want to see because they're convinced Putin is then going to march into Poland.
And well, not just Putin. The argument is, and it's not crazy, like since World War II, if you allow, some kind of strong country to railroad or just bulldoze another one, where's it going to end, right? So they can say this with a straight face, that like, you sold out the Ukrainians to Putin, who are you going to sell out next? It definitely would embolden our enemies in certain contexts. I'd be worried about Taiwan. I'd be worried about Iran. So at the same time, it's like, this is the difficulties of geopolitics. Like if the U.S. has its finger in every pie and we're everywhere on Earth, at a certain point, you've got to pick your priorities. So I am supportive of, and I think most Americans in this point are supportive of President Trump pulling back on the American empire. But at the same time, at a certain point, you also do have to draw your line in the sand. So I'm just very... The other thing is, I think I'm very skeptical that the public is well informed on this issue, because both the Ukrainians and the Russians have extremely enormous incentives to keep their mouths shut and downplay certain things and overplay others. So we don't know what's going on behind closed doors. I think that's one of the most bizarre myths of American news, is that international affairs is basically conducted in public. Like, what are you talking about? Like, we all know all sorts. Like the Cuban Missile Crisis with when there were nuclear missiles in Cuba and JFK sat down with Khrushchev. Basically, he got them to pull the missiles from Cuba, but in return, we pulled our missiles from, I believe, Europe. But we weren't allowed to talk. We didn't talk about that part. We only talked about the other part. So JFK looked like a big win, but it was kind of a draw. So these things only come to light, many years later. Please look up, double check what I'm saying in this if I get the facts exactly right. But the point is,
Reagan and Gorbachev were back channeling as well. We didn't learn about that until later.
Oh yeah, like also I mean all sorts of things. Like North Korea, there's no official diplomatic relationships between the U.S. and North Korea, but when they capture people or we go through Sweden or something like that. So there's all sorts of machinations, and I also think foreign policy is the area of American politics that's least receptive to democratic pressures. I mean, the war machine and the military does what it feels like it needs to do or wants to do, very independently of the populace at large. And in one sense, you can't really blame them. In the other sense, it's very unfortunate.
Well, but don't you think that's exactly because of what you just said? So much of it is being conducted behind closed doors. The
Right.
public can never actually have a full, complete perspective. And the Brookings Institute, AEI people know that. And they can be kind of sneering about it too. But it's not the public's fault that they're not, and rightfully in some cases, privy to every little bit of classified information. Even with Trump, there's almost this illusion because he actually does conduct foreign policy in public often. He's like doing art of the deal through the media in
Right.
different cases with Putin. He has been doing a lot of that. Even with Netanyahu, he has done a lot of that. So on the one hand, with Trump, there is what he's saying, and it is meant to be part of the negotiating, but you still have you have a completely incomplete picture until just those little things that we learn decades later are changing what's happening behind the scenes dramatically.
And I'm also very concerned. I did a book on North Korea, dear reader, and when he had the summit in Singapore with Kim Jong Un, with Marshal Kim Jong Un, there were so many people like just giddy at the idea that it would fail. And it's just like, can you put aside your hatred of Trump for 5 minutes? They have concentration camps there. Like the people, they starve children for political purposes. Can you just like for 5 minutes, like stop hating Trump and just hope that something would work out? And obviously it didn't, but it could have. So I'm very concerned that whatever deal he does make, if this had been like a Biden deal, he'd be like up for the Nobel Prize. But if it's Trump making the deal, it's like we have to stop it at all costs because Trump's an idiot and blah, 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 will be the argument. I really wish people had more of a focus on saving lives and less on one-upsmanships. Whatever, you know the term. Sorry, English is my second language.
I don't.
One-upmanship. There you go.
That sounds right to me. We'll go with it. But yeah, that's one of the. Let me try this out on you, because I think the last 100 years plus of foreign policy across the entire world it's just been so dramatically and quickly changed by nuclear innovation.
That's
period. Right. And it happened so quickly that we were like the frogs in the boiling pot, and we didn't know exactly how dramatic this change was, and got used to these strange negotiations. Like people will always say nuclear technology has been an incredible success and win for peace. And there are all kinds of problems with that claim, but we're a blink of an eye in the course of human history into this experiment. It's like,
right.
if this is a 100-day experiment, we're like halfway through the first hour. And that's terrifying in ways I think we just are numb to. Not us, but I think a lot of people here in DC are completely numb to, and it's scary sometimes. Like right now, honestly, it's scary.
Yeah, and you saw this when Trump was like ranting. He's like, I'm trying to prevent, when he was yelling at Zelensky in the Oval Office, when he's like, I'm trying to prevent World War III. Like, I mean, millions and billions of people could die instantly. Putin obviously has a huge nuclear arsenal. So it's like, what are we doing here? Again, I think discussed this previously at another time, is that Putin is getting away with it because no one is arguing that we're going to go to Moscow and take him out. So he's not having these kind of consequences that like Saddam had for Kuwait or something like that. Years later, they came back to so-called finish the job, which was obviously a huge calamity. So someone's cutting a deal at some point, and like what will, compromise is something that everyone can live with, but nobody likes. That's what it's going to look like. And I mean, the Ukrainian people are very proud people. They despise the Russians with good reason. I don't blame them one bit, but many parts of the eastern Ukraine would be more than happy to be part of Russia. And at a certain point, it's like, something has to happen.
Yeah, I think this will be my last question before we move on to the much more serious topic of Texas Democrats running away from their jobs. But it's that point about what ultimately happened. Like, you couldn't say that when the war started.
Right.
And it's not a situation that anyone's particularly happy about, except for Putin, of course, but it's just reality. And we're kept so, I think, cushioned from reality because exactly what you said, earlier, there's just a control over the media narrative on foreign policy by people who are in the know and in the loop that keeps everyone else sort of at an arm's length from the truth. I don't know.
And I got to shout out to KT McFarland. She was a member of Trump's cabinet the first term for a brief period. I was with her in the Fox News green room during the Obama years. So this would have been before 2016. And she goes, watch, Putin's going to march in Ukraine. He sees a weakness, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, you crazy old warmonger lady, neocon. And man, she called it. So credit to KT for calling it way ahead of time. I think we all thought there's not going to be a war in Europe in our lifetimes. Those days are over. Man, we were wrong. The period, end of story. And she saw it.
Over the years, I hope I've been clear about this. I'm not just pro-birth, I'm pro-life. And being pro-life, of course, means standing with mothers not only before their baby is born, but long after. And that is exactly why I partner with Preborn. Preborn is awesome. They don't just save babies, they make motherhood abundantly possible. They provide free ultrasounds and share the truth of the gospel with women in crisis. And then they stay. How great is that? With real practical help. They are there, including financial support for up to 2 years after the baby is born. I say again, how awesome is that? And here's where you can make a difference. Just $28 provides a free life-saving ultrasound. One chance for a mother to see her baby. And when she does, she is twice as likely to choose life. It is incredibly powerful. Preborn is trying to save 70,000 babies this year. This is what true Christ-centered compassion looks like, not just for the baby, but for the mother too. So don't just say you're pro-life, live it. Help save babies and support mothers today. Go to preborn.com/Emily or call 855-601-2229. That's preborn.com/Emily.